Welcome back to Major Intonio's presentation of The Ifs of History by Joseph Edgar Chamberlin. Chapter 4: If Columbus had kept his straight course westward.
On the morning of the 7th day of October, 1492, Christopher Columbus, sailing unknown seas in quest of Cipango, the Indies, and the Grand Khan, still held resolutely to a course which he had laid out due to the westward. This course he held in spite of the murmurings of his crew, who wished to turn back, and contrary to the advice of that skilled and astute navigator, Martin Alonzo Pinzon, who commanded the Pinta. Pinzon had repeatedly advised that the course be altered to the southwestward. Columbus was sailing on a theory. Pinzon, like any other practical navigator in a strange sea, was feeling his way and answering the indications of the waters, the skies, the green grasses that drifted on the surface of the waves, the flocks of birds that wheeled and dipped and showed their heels to the far-wandered navigators, and seemed to know their way so well over that remote and uncharted wilderness of the deep. Columbus had said, "We will sail to the west and ever to the west until the west becomes the east," which to the men before the mast was sheer lunacy. But Pinzon had already found strange Afric lands. The scent of their leaves and flowers seemed to lie in his nostrils. Martin Alonzo Pinzon put off in a boat later on that 7th day of October and came back to the Santa Maria, in which was the admiral. He brought the information that he had seen a great multitude of birds passing from the north to the southwest, from which cause he deemed it reasonable to suppose that they, the birds, were going to sleep on land, or were perhaps flying from winter which must be approaching in the countries from which they came. The admiral knew it was by the aid of the flight of birds that the Portuguese had discovered the greater part of the new lands which they had found. Columbus hesitated, wavered. Had the heart of the great theorist, sailing obstinately straight west in obedience to the call of the land whose presence there he had reasoned out, misgiven him at last? Had the discouragement and incredulity of his men affected him? We do not know. But we do know that finally he heeded Pinzon's oft-repeated demand that the course be altered. It looked like common sense to follow the birds. Really it was not. The theory was his true guide. Columbus betrayed his faith. He resolved, as his journal recorded, to turn his prow to the west-southwest, with the determination of pursuing that course for 2 days. He never resumed the westward course. He had weakened in his devotion to his own idea and had lost a continent for Spain and the Roman Catholic Church. For in spite of the conclusion reached by John Boyd Thacker, in his monumental work on Columbus, that even if the admiral had held the westward course, his fleet would not have passed the northernmost tip of the Bahamas, there is sufficient ground for the generally accepted conclusion that his landfall in that case would have been on the coast of Florida or South Carolina, or even North Carolina. After the alteration of his course, Columbus continued to sail for 4 days in a general southwesterly direction, before on the 12th of October he fell upon Watling's Island. In that time he had sailed, according to his own reckoning, 141 leagues. This distance, if persisted in due to the westward, would have brought him in contact with drift and real bird flight indications of the continent. Let us see toward what point his course had been laid. Setting sail from Gomera, in the Canary Islands, Columbus purposed to go straight to the west until he reached land. Gomera lies in about the latitude of Cape Canaveral, or the Indian River, Florida. A line drawn from Gomera to Cape Canaveral passes to the northward of the Bahamas altogether. No land lay in the admiral's path to Florida. But any supposition that Columbus would not have gone to the northward of the Indian River ignores the northward drift that the Gulf Stream would have caused his ships. He had yet, of course, to reach the axis of that powerful current, which is here comparatively narrow, and runs very swiftly at the point where the due westward course from Gomera would have struck it. It is a fair chance that this drift would have carried Columbus so far north as to land him in the neighborhood of what is now Charleston, South Carolina, or even further to the northward, if he had followed the path he had laid out for himself. Amazing the consequences that hung upon the flight of those multitudes of birds that wheeled Bahamaward on that October day. The admiral's landfall on the coast even of Florida would have made all temperate America Spanish, for it would have focused the might of Ferdinand and Isabella upon our shores. We know that the islands which lay immediately to the southward of his Salvador in the Bahamas beckoned Columbus in that direction, and that the Indians were able by signs to make it clear to him that a greater land, which was Cuba, and which he called Cipango, lay in this southerly direction. That way he laid his course in order, as he wrote in his journal, to go to this other island, which is very large, and where all these men whom I am bringing from the island of San Salvador make signs that there's a great deal of gold, and that they wear bracelets of it on their arms and legs, and in their ears, and in their noses, and on their breasts. Reason enough. Only it meant that Spain's energy in this hemisphere was to be directed to the West Indies and South America and Mexico for as long a time as it was destined to endure, and that the vast continental north was to be left as the heritage of another race. It is true that Florida afterward became Spanish, but it was not a question of what Florida merely was to be. If Columbus had landed upon the mainland, the northeastward trend of the coast, reaching back towards Spain by just so much, would have beckoned him northward, not southward. Even if he had explored southwardly, by some chance, he must have returned northward when he had reached the point of the Florida peninsula, and in the northerly direction he would have cruised, returning Europeward. And he would have annexed the land step by step, as he annexed Cuba, Hispaniola, and all the southern lands as fast as he touched them. The Carolinas, Virginia, Maryland, would have been the scenes of the Spaniards' settlement for 100 years. Though afterward they took Florida, that was as a mere side issue. It was unconsidered, neglected, after Cuba and Mexico, and was passed on at length to the race that came to the mainland more than 100 years after the landfall at San Salvador. Who can estimate the consequences of a fate which should have sent Columbus straight on his way? Who can compass the thought of the millions of country-loving Americans of our race unborn here, but nurtured under skies now foreign to their very nature, but for that glittering flock of tropical birds whirling southwestwardly? It is no idle conjecture. Von Humboldt, one of the wisest of cosmographers, says that never in the world's history had the flight of birds such momentous consequences. It may be said, he avers, to have determined the first settlements in the new continent and its distribution between the Latin and Germanic races. He believed that the Gulf Stream would have carried Columbus around Cape Hatteras. It might indeed have done so. We of the United States may well believe that the hand of Providence guided those birds on that October day. But nonetheless are we compelled to admit the strange dependence of human events upon circumstances that are most trifling in themselves.
This concludes today's reading of the Ifs of History by Joseph Edgar Chamberlin. Join us also next Sunday for the subsequent part. Subscribe to Major Intonio's channel. Thank you for listening, and so long.